So we're really happy to be here. My name is Jay Singleton. I'm the program manager at Legal Services State Support in Minnesota. We're a statewide organization that works with legal aid programs to work on a lot of legal technology projects and coordination projects. We also do some training for lawyers. And one of our projects is Minnesota's statewide website, lawhelpmn.org. And then I'll turn it over to my colleague, Amanda, to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Amanda Sauber. Let me know if you can't hear me. We can adjust our mics up here. I'm the legal technology project manager at State Support, working alongside Jay. I mostly manage our website, content, bugs, tickets to our developers, and then some of the content that we're going to be talking about today.
And I'm Dave Nolet. I'm the BC and Digital Program Director at Justice Education Society in beautiful Vancouver, Canada. And I'll say a little bit more about our organization later.
Thanks, Dave. So today, Amanda and I are going to talk about two Minnesota projects that we've worked on. One is our triage tool on our statewide website, the Law Help MN Guide. And then the second one is some knowledge tests that we developed through a recent TIG that we received. And then we're going to pass it over to Dave to talk about two of his projects that are used to help guide people to the resources that they need and help them complete processes. So beginning with the guide, it's basically an interactive tool that's designed to help users find both self-help information and referrals to not just legal aid, but to like modest means programs, to self-help information. Like we have a great self-help center with our Minnesota courts. So all law libraries, all those types of resources where somebody could actually interact with a human and get additional assistance. It's intended to be used primarily, our like main audience we were thinking about when we developed it was SRL, so pro se folks who are trying to navigate these systems on their own. So just everyday folks who may not have much interaction with the law in other parts of their life. Our tool really builds upon kind of an existing framework within our site of a library of fact sheets, booklets, forms, things like that, and then a database of legal services providers, again, using that broader definition of legal services providers. And we encourage people to use it because we think that we have reliable, legally accurate resources that are written in plain language and that can really help them kind of get a baseline understanding of what kind of issues they're dealing with. The primary self-help information part of our website is a library of nearly 200 fact sheets that we review annually that cover the kinds of issues that we see people of low incomes, people living with disabilities, et cetera, that the types of issues that those folks are likely to be facing. We have somebody on staff who is our plain language expert. And one of the things I was talking with somebody earlier about was like, how do you make that sustainable across generations of staff? Where she's like got 20 years and she's just like a magician with making things really easy to understand and has a lot of experience going back and forth with attorneys who may like have very strong feelings about retaining some of those more complicated words and references to legal issues. And she's really developed a good system of working with them to really distill it down to what really matters to the person who's trying to engage with that legal issue. Because if somebody can't understand it, then even if it's legally accurate, then you're not really doing a service, is kind of our philosophy. So Elsa, our fact sheet queen, as we call her, she reviews everything annually. We also have every single fact sheet and some longer form content that we refer to as booklets get reviewed annually. Those are all reviewed by legal aid partners. Our office sits within a coalition of a number of legal aid organizations. So every year we send out our fact sheets, like we just have an Excel sheet, like a shared Excel where people sign up. And then we send them a Word version. So it's fairly low tech, but it's the best, most sustainable solution that we've been able to find. And then have them do track changes. We have older attorneys who aren't comfortable with that, who just literally print it out, write out their changes. And so since we're asking for these lawyers to help us with that, we kind of are willing to work with them to whatever is most accessible for their comfort level. So that information, that's kind of our process to make sure that those fact sheets, which again are kind of our top level content, remain easy to understand and legally reliable. So going back to the guide itself, when somebody enters our homepage, which I'll talk about that later, but on the homepage, kind of the first thing that they see is a question about what kind of legal help they're looking for, whether it's a lawyer to learn more about their rights or both a lawyer and information. And depending on which option they choose, that informs the path that they take through the guide. So everybody will always answer questions to define their legal issue. And on the back end, depending on the questions that the responses that they provide to the questions, we'll assign on the back end a legal topic ID. So that's like a unique identifier for a taxonomy of legal issues that we've developed that is mapped to LIST, which is the national listserv, but more specific to Minnesota and more detailed for those of you who want to geek out on taxonomies. So if you have selected that you want information of any type, then next you'll see a list of our resources that are responsive to that, our self-help information. So in the back end, every time we load a new piece of content, we're assigning different legal topics to that piece of content. So we load up a new emancipation fact sheet, and we're like, oh, this has to do with, now I can't think of a legal topic, but XYZ legal topic. And then if somebody has taken a route that is assigned with that legal topic, then that fact sheet will pop up as one of their results. So it's a fairly automated process, which is something that we were looking for when we were building this system. If somebody has indicated that they'd also like a lawyer and referral information, then they'll proceed and we'll ask a little bit of information to understand their eligibility for legal services and for different services. So that basically boils down to, at this point, calculating their where they fall on the federal poverty guidelines by assessing how many people live in the household income, and then the frequency of the income. So they can do, I think, weekly, monthly, or annually, and then we calculate that in the background to see where that maps onto federal poverty guidelines. Then we also ask for age and for zip code, because those are kind of like the three key pieces that we've distilled things down to into determining if somebody qualifies for legal aid. If we match those three pieces of eligibility information with the legal topic, that's kind of the balance point that we found for getting somebody a pretty good referral. We used to have some additional questions in the guide around like veteran status, disability, and what we found was that it wasn't like people weren't able to answer those questions in the ways that legal aid programs define them. And then there was also some differences in how different legal aid organizations define those categories. So we've kind of limited the amount of eligibility information that we're collecting at this point. The last screen is some soft factors, as we call them. So it determines whether somebody seems more amenable to self-help versus getting advice or full rep, where we'll raise those self-help results, informational results, and then whether someone might be amenable to mediation, because we do have some mediation services available in Minnesota. So those should only impact the order in which results show up, not whether results show up, with the caveat that if there is if somebody indicates that they're fearful of the other person, then we will not present mediation results. So somebody goes through that process and they get a list of referrals to organizations that they can filter by no-cost lawyers, which is what we call legal aid, clinics, and then lawyer referral services. And then if these results are there, we'll also have boxes for mediation and informational services. For many of our legal aid partners, we then allow people to apply online. So if they click that blue apply online button, then they'll be taken to a form within our website where they fill out some more information like contact information, et cetera, information about any upcoming hearings. And then we send that through a legal server API into the organization's legal server system. It comes in as an e-transfer. So a little bit about how we built the guide. We built on the work that a lot of other states had used. In particular, we looked at what Maine, Illinois, Connecticut, and Michigan had done previously, and like literally had their like triage spreadsheets that we adjusted for Minnesota. That was really helpful. Again, some of this stuff is like fairly low tech, but effective. And then when we were building the guide, it was part of a broader Drupal website redesign where we were moving platforms for our entire website, and we incorporated this triage piece into that. We also, as a part of that, built a database of referral information that we call the Legal Organization Online Network, or LOON, which is Minnesota State BIRD. And that includes the ability for legal aid providers to log in and ideally update changes in eligibility requirements in real time. We also now have a staff person who spends probably a third to half of his time working with those legal aid editors to make sure that their stuff is actually getting up to date. There's a password protected version of Loon that legal aid providers can also log into to get a little bit more detailed referral information. As we were doing the testing, as we were doing the build, we also made sure to build in user testing and focus groups. We held focus groups primarily to talk with legal aid folks and other kind of power users about how they might use Loon when they were making referrals. I went and like sat in with some intake folks as they were doing intakes to try to like learn how might you use this like other website tool to figure out where you could send somebody if you weren't able to help them yourself. And that was really helpful. And then user testing, this was pre-pandemic days. So we actually had folks we gave come into our office and just complete different scenarios. And then we gave them a gift card. So we did $1 a minute as compensation. And I think we did Target gift cards, which Target is headquartered in Minnesota. So it's always a favorite. And then we also did user testing again with our power users once we had like a beta version of the site. So we had folks, I think from I'm trying to remember, from the law library, I think this was before your time. But
I was one of the testers.
Oh, that's right.
Before joining you guys.
Yeah. From our legal aid partners.
Yes.
And they gave really helpful feedback as well into how they would use different parts of the site. So we were trying to keep multiple audiences in mind, although we were, I think, keeping kind of the general public audience as our priority. So in terms of like what worked and what where we had opportunities for growth, I'll phrase it. I think that using the legal topics worked really well in terms of being able to tag a lot of content and not have to manually update things every time we change something in the triage system. We also do periodic reviews to make sure that content is still that people are finding what they need to be finding, and that everything is in good working order, and that as we're as there's like new areas of law that come up, which for a while was happening a lot within the immigration context, that we're still guiding people to that kind of content. And then also in the design side, what's worked is keeping the design really simple. That's hard to do as time goes on because you want to add more and more features, but that can get really cluttered. So we try really hard to keep things just like really simple without too many different areas that you can click around in. That being said, we also want to provide, in our situation, different avenues for people to find the information. So you can Google and get right to a fact sheet, or you can go to our website and you can use this tool to find that information. We do want people to use the tool, the guide, as much as possible, because we can get them like a bundle of information rather than the one resource that showed up when they Googled. But we understand that we want people to find the information in whatever way is easiest for them. What didn't work is that for a while, and we still have this a bit, is that once you answer questions about the legal issue and are presented with your self-help information, we used to only have one pathway through the guide. So you would get that information, and then you had to like look at that information and then click another button to continue to enter your eligibility information. And we saw a huge drop off of people who maybe thought they were done with the process or just didn't see the button for whatever, got distracted by the fact sheet that they were reading. But we were seeing a lot of drop offs, which is why we added the initial questions to better target what information people were getting and kind of set expectations as well. And then also we've had times where we've gotten very specific and granular in the kinds of legal issues, and we've started to pull back on that, where we'll just like remove a final screen of those initial legal questions that we're asking folks because it wasn't adding much value. Like the resources were pretty much the same, even if you chose option C versus option B. So in terms of maintenance, we do an annual review. Amanda does, I should say, an annual review of the guide where we track traffic, the number of users, and in particular, we look at in some of our routes, you can have a none of these apply option. And so we want to limit the number of times that somebody is like, I don't see an option that makes sense for me. So we focus particularly on where we have a high number of folks answering that none of these apply and try to figure out. It's kind of an art of like, what might they be looking for? And we do have like a little survey they can fill out, but we don't get like a huge response on that. We also make sure that we haven't taken resources down, so now you end up at like a blank endpoint, different things like that. And then we've also tried to do a bunch of usability improvements over the years that I won't get into too much just because of time, but trying to play around with like, how can we make sure that we're getting more usage of the guide? How can we get more people to the end? Is there a way we can get people from like a fact sheet to the eligibility section of the guide so that they've already gotten their self-help info because they Googled and found the emancipation fact sheet? Can we now get them to enter eligibility information and get them a lawyer referral? These have all had various levels of success. I would say nothing is like bulletproof and perfect. So it's continually improving is our hope. And then we recently added a lot of accessibility improvements with like super technical kind of like how rotors are working and how options are working. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so we did a little test to see if we could do a very low budget natural language search integrating, or it was like a pre-integration to, if you're familiar with Spot. So it wasn't Spot, but it was kind of leading up to Spot where we kind of built our own kind of like, I'm trying to remember, like a list of terms and then what we would want to return based on those terms. And we did some user testing and all of our users hated it. And they were just, I mean, we might have just had a skewed sample, but everybody was like, I would just rather like choose housing than have to like type in, figure out how to describe my issue. So with those initial results, we kind of like pulled back on that until we could see what some other states were doing, basically, and take from that.
I think it's something that we'd like to look at again in the future and may get back into. But yeah, we'll put a pause on that one for now.
So then I wanted to just end before I turn it over to Amanda with some basic analytics. So these are the responses from 2022 to that initial question. And I think it's interesting. It's pretty much split fairly evenly between people who want a lawyer to learn more about their rights and who want both a lawyer and information. The other thing I wanted to point out with this data is, so these users only represent about 6% of users who used Law Help, which I think has been, and I think that I've heard that's not that much of an aberration for other states who have triage tools. So I think it's just something that we keep in mind that, you know, a lot of people do just want to Google and get to a fact sheet. But we also want to provide this pathway that's a little bit more assistance and will hopefully get people a little bit more holistic of results. But it is, we often I'll speak for myself. I often get like very deep into the triage side and like, I think it's helpful to sometimes pull back and think about how that is playing out in the context of everything else that you're working on your website. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda to talk about quizzes.
All right, thanks, Jay. So I'm going to talk about the knowledge test, as Jay just said, quizzes. That's how we kind of more commonly refer to them in our office. So you'll probably hear us use that term more so than knowledge tests. These came about as part of a TIG grant that we had in 2019, where we created a series of short animated videos accompanied by a short 1 to 3 question quiz. And really what we were looking for is to try to understand whether these short videos helped increase the user's understanding of the content being presented in the fact sheet. And we were able to gauge that through the use of those quizzes. So what exactly is a quiz? As I said, it's 1 to 3 questions. They're short, they're plain language, and they're based on the content in the fact sheet. And we try to mirror the language as much as we can in the questions that we use in the fact sheet. We have found in a couple of instances where we change one word and it seems to kind of throw users off or kind of miss some of the understanding. So we try to stick really close to the language that's being used throughout the fact sheet. Who would use this? I would say anybody in Minnesota who's got a civil legal issue within the state, who is just looking to understand the law better. And why would they use it, or why should they use it? I think it's really beneficial in assisting folks with understanding the concepts, the legal concepts, and kind of building their own confidence, especially if they're looking at going into a legal case pro se, doing their own filings. It just gives them that confidence that they actually understand the legal concepts behind that information. And so this is just kind of an image of what the quiz would look like on one of our fact sheets. We only have these available on our fact sheets and not on every one at this point. But we have a little pop-up that'll appear after, I forget how many seconds it is, 7 seconds maybe, on a fact sheet that, you know, if a user hasn't scrolled all the way down to notice it yet, it'll just kind of be like, hey, try my quiz. And then it'll take you down to the bottom of the page to try it. And then on the right side of this, you can see this is a quiz on our paternity and child custody fact sheet. And you can just see the couple of questions. These were yes, no, and then it pops up based on the answer with a little bit of an explanation and whether they were correct or not. We also have a threshold set that if they get so many answers wrong, then it'll also pop up and offer them some additional legal help resources. So it'll either direct them if they want to try going through the guide to kind of better assess or explain their legal issue to get to those resources, or it'll also prompt our live chat feature where they can log in and chat with one of us if one of us is currently logged in, or if we're not, then it goes to our law librarians who are real responsive in getting back to those. So developing the knowledge test, this was actually before my time joining state support, but I know what our staff did. They had created a screener tool that was looking at certain criteria. We were looking at the traffic use of those fact sheets. We were looking at the specific legal issue being addressed, the complexity of that issue, and then just kind of looking for common areas of confusion for users. And kind of pulling all of that together, the team collaboratively discussed and then decided which of the fact sheets we were going to use. And as part of the TIG, it was to do 30 fact sheets. We're now up to 35 quizzes that we have, but we started with a pool of 30 of them. And then similar with the developing the quizzes and the videos, that was collaborative as well. The team all worked together to come up with on those fact sheets, what the quiz questions should look like, what those explanation answers should come up with. And then we had a dedicated staff member who worked with a short time intern to create the videos that went along with it. And we created those in a tool called Toonly, where you can just basically like add imagery and there's no actual speaking. It's just like music in the background with like little word pop-ups that come up to kind of explain the legal issue. And then below that is where the user would see the quiz pop up. And then, of course, as every good project, and of course, as every TIG grant, as many of you may know, the part of it was figuring out a plan for then analyzing this data and getting to our goal of understanding, are these videos helpful in users understanding the content or not? And so we had developed a plan. We had created a custom, well, I say we, our developers created a custom like quiz manager within our Drupal site that contains a place where we can pull the statistics on those quizzes. I see we've got a question over here.
Yeah, I was just wondering, on complexity, is that if something was more complex, was it a better candidate for a video and a quiz, or not as good of a candidate?
In a very legal answer, I'm going to say it depends. There are some of our fact sheets that we don't really think would be a great fit for a quiz. And so when we're looking at that, that's part of what we're looking at is, you know, would this really be a good fit for this? And would this be helpful to a user? We're continuing to add quizzes because they have been very successful. And so typically each month we're adding another one as we go through and meet together as a team. I think our hope is to have quizzes on most of our fact sheets, but there are some that we just don't think that it would be a benefit to users. So we may not end up doing them on every single one.
I think part of it is like whether you can like ask a question about the issue in a way that would make sense to people. And especially like part of it is our creativity. Like if it's like an answer that's it depends, like that's not super helpful. So can we figure out a way that we can like draft the question and with options that would like be intelligible and help people? I think that was one of your questions.
Oh, yes.
You mentioned your developers developed a Drupal add-in for managing quizzes.
Mhm.
That be distributed as an open source Drupal plugin so that other legal aids could use it?
Yeah, we'd be happy to get our developers to share it in like a GitHub or something. Would that work?
I'll flip to the next one. So some of the things that we learned going through this process, our quizzes are very popular. And we have found that they're actually really, really useful in helping us to revise content within our fact sheets so that users are better understanding it. We can kind of pinpoint, you know, where things seem to be confusing, or maybe there's a single word that, you know, we could find a better word that, you know, would be more plain language or would just kind of hone in more on the understanding of that issue. So we've seen a lot of success. And as we go through our reviews, we compare, you know, from one to another, you know, are any changes that we've made either to a quiz question or to content in the fact sheet? Do we see improvement in accuracy across the board? And so far, I would say for the most part, we have seen increased improvement for each one that we've made. So that's been really helpful for us. Another thing that we've seen that works really well is using multiple choice questions versus strictly yes, no. When we first started out, I don't really know why we had it in our minds, but for some reason, like, we thought we could only do yes, no questions, which we found to be a little bit difficult to draft a yes, no question because there's always that room for interpretation. So those were a little bit difficult, and we found that they seem to be more confusing for users. So we've started kind of changing some of them over, or new ones that we're adding. We started making more of them multiple choice, and that seems to be more successful. One of the things that didn't work so well was the videos. I think the issue with it is that they were really time consuming to create them, and we weren't really seeing a lot of usage of them, and they didn't really seem to make any sort of an impact on users' understanding of the content. We've kept them deployed on the site, on the fact sheets that have them, because we don't really see a reason why we should take them down. They're not a disservice, but they're also not a huge benefit. So we figured we may as well just leave them up. But at this point, we don't plan on creating any additional ones. With part of the TIG, we also had created a couple of those videos in a narrative format versus the animated to see if that made a difference. And either way, we found that the videos just weren't viewed much and didn't really seem to have an impact on understanding.
How is the content different on the video than it was on the fact sheet? Or is it effectively the same thing, just content different?
It's effectively the same thing. And maybe if we have some time at the end, we can pull one of them up and show you. But it's kind of like an animated little scenario that someone's kind of going through, like, oh, here's what my problem is, and someone else is like, oh, we can help you with this. Go to this. And so it's just kind of cute, fun, like little animals going through an issue. So just a quick couple of stats on the quizzes as well. As I mentioned, we have now currently 35 of them on our site. And in 2022, I'm actually still going through my analysis review of them. But we had 32,677 total responses. And by responses, I mean that's actual answers to individual questions, not necessarily individual takers of a quiz. Overall, we're seeing an average of 75% accuracy, which is a little bit skewed. We did have one of our quizzes that we noticed here at the end of the year that had a problem in the back end that the correct response wasn't tagged. So users were not able to add a correct response on that question. So I would like to say that our accuracy should actually be a little bit better than that. But on average, 75%. And then maintaining the quiz, much like with our guide, we do an annual review of that as well. We've got that quiz manager and the quiz stats in our Drupal site that we can pull up that information. We can export that data out into a CSV. And then what I do is I break that out individually by quiz. I run some pivot tables to check for accuracy of each individual question within a quiz. And then we can kind of look at that in the broader scheme across all of the different quizzes. We also look at that in comparison to the number of questions on a quiz, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, to kind of gauge that overall accuracy. And then we can use that data to make some changes and some updates and see, if there's a low accuracy, what's the reason for that? Is it a poorly drafted question? Is there confusing content in the fact sheet? And then we use that to drive changes. And as I said, we then compare that from year to year to make sure that we are seeing improvements with the changes that we make over time. And then adding new quizzes, that's still a collaborative effort. We meet monthly and look at our analytics to decide what's kind of our highest use fact sheets using that same criteria that we came up with in the screener to select which fact sheet we're going to add one to next. And then we collaboratively discuss and decide what those questions should be, what the explanations should be. And then, of course, our plain language queen gives her input on that as well. And then just some final takeaways for both the guide and for the quizzes. We do our annual reviews on both of these, and we try to make improvements as much as we can. But like Jay said earlier, nothing's ever going to be perfect. So we can make things better. We can see improvement over time, but we're never going to be able to avoid some of these scenarios. Like with the guide, we're never going to get down to a 0, none of these apply to me response rate, but we can use the information that we're getting to figure out, is somebody just having a hard time drilling down far enough to find the information? Is the information maybe under the wrong topic? Or is there a gap in the information in our logic that we're not getting to that they're looking for? So those are some of the things that we're looking at. We've got some plans in mind of trying to find some other ways that we can assess, what is it that people are looking for if they're not finding that information, potentially adding a free text field that they could write into. So those are some things that we've talked about in the future, but we've got a few other things in mind first. And then with the quizzes, I would say the one hang up with it is the data collection tool that we have built in Drupal is a bit limited. We're not able to get a ton of information. We don't collect any sort of like personal information from users. And so we can't kind of get any of that personal information to look at then as well in terms of our users. So it's kind of becomes a best guess scenario. Like I said, when I break it down into each individual quiz, then I go through and I look at those questions and I try to assess how many total quiz takers did we have on this quiz, how many of them repeated the quiz. They do have an opportunity to repeat, the quiz or the questions if they want to. So just trying to figure out what really is my total number of takers. How many times did folks repeat a question? Are they repeating it because they got it wrong the first time? And just looking at some of that information. So it's very time consuming, as you can imagine, with 32,000 responses. So it takes a long time to go through. It's manual. It allows for human error. So it's not perfect, but it's definitely achieving our goal of helping us to improve our content. And we are seeing that benefit overall. All right. Forgot we have one more on here. So this is just kind of a short snippet of what my analysis spreadsheet is that I pulled together. And so when I'm looking at it, it really is just kind of a best guess. And so here, this was on our emancipation quiz. In the next column, the yes, no's, that is, did the user get the answer correct or not? And then we do get a date and a timestamp, which is what I'm using to try to assess, is this the same person or not who repeated this? So I'm looking at things like the first three of these I can see have the, a timestamp all together. So it looks like this was the same user who answered these first three questions. It looks like they got one of the answers wrong. In the next three, that's only a few minutes afterwards, I see that now I have all yeses. So I can probably make a fairly safe assumption that this was the same user who repeated this quiz. So then in the blue box there, what I'm looking at is I'm typing out, my number of users along the line. I'm saying, yes, this is, one single user or two separate users. And then the number of questions that they answered. Users don't have to complete every question. So sometimes they'll just do one of the three. Sometimes they'll do all three of them, but then they'll repeat one of them only one time and not all of them. So just trying to make that best guess analysis to figure out our numbers and what we're really looking at. And then before I pass it over to Dave, we just have our contact information on here. That'll be in our slide deck too, that is on Kuva. So with that, Dave.
I can hardly wait. This is my 7th ITC, and so glad to see both familiar faces as well as mostly new ones. So that's just plain exciting. So I work at Justice Education Society. We say Jess, and I'm just going to do that if that's okay. And there we go. And so, we're a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to empower people, empower people to access and deliver justice. I wanted to get my timing just right. To access and deliver justice in Canada and globally. And we do this across the 3 different initiatives that you see on the screen. So we provide legal education and information to improve legal capability. So that's broadly speaking for the public, as well as we have a series of programs for distinct groups like youth, girls and women, immigrants, racialized communities, Indigenous peoples, LGBTQS, and a number of other vulnerable peoples. We also work to strengthen justice systems. And so we work in Canada, we work in the US, and in 17 other countries. And in that context, we work with governments, with justice institutions, with courts, with legal professionals, community service organizations. And we work on a broad range of issues such as gender-based violence, human rights, criminal investigation, corruption, and a range of other topics within this space, again, working with justice organizations to try and improve their systems. Finally, we have digital solutions. That's what we're here to talk about today. Ultimately, our Just Digital team supports the first 2 initiatives that we work on, but we also work on a contract basis. And so we work with organizations such as yourselves. We've worked with a number of organizations all through Canada and the US and then beyond. And so today, I'm going to talk about some of the specific digital solutions we create. We produce websites, we produce web videos, we have custom applications that we develop as well. And so the two projects I'm going to speak about are both custom applications, and it's right in line in terms of having interactive content, moving beyond static legal help information to provide interactive content for our users. So the first client here is Vehicle Sales Authority. And in BC, the Vehicle Sales Authority is a division of the government, and they have the authority to license and regulate car dealerships, as well as to provide the public with help information to address issues that may arise regarding the purchase or lease of a vehicle. So a government agency, they get thousands of inquiries a year. They have a phone line, they have a website. And in terms of phone inquiries, most of those inquiries end up with their service team saying the information's available on our website. On the other hand, they also investigate claims, so consumers can file a formal complaint, and so they'll investigate those claims, but ultimately a path to resolution invariably involves consumers contacting the dealers and working through some kind of arrangement. And so VSA contacted Jess about a customer service issue in terms of how can they improve what they have already in place to better serve clients. And so in that regard, we created My Self Help and Connector. So I'll start with My Self Help. What is it? It's an interactive guided pathway solution. It helps consumers to understand their legal rights and information, the responsibilities of dealerships, and ultimately guides them to be aware of options to resolve disputes. Why should they use it? Ultimately, Vehicle Sales Authority are truly the experts and authority, literally the authority within the space. So it's authoritative, plain language, legal help content. And ultimately, by engaging with the guides, it's an interactive process where they get the information that they are looking for based on their issues. In terms of the content pathways, you see some of the decision trees that we evolved here. Ultimately, we worked with the client to identify issues, and so we grouped that range of content, the series of fact sheets that they had, into 9 core issues. From there, in terms of a car purchase, it's often about the condition of the vehicle, and so that's about the condition and or warranty issue. Or it's often about money. So is it the deposit? Is it the total purchase price? Is it financing? Those 5 are the big 5 out of the 9. And so we deconstructed that content in terms of the resources that they have available and working through a set of questions and answers to ask the users, what is your issue? But drilling down on that question deeper and deeper as you move along the pathway, and then ultimately providing guidance on what they can do to help resolve the issue. Just in terms of some of the development inputs, we worked very collaboratively with the client in terms of the decision trees, in terms of the issues, in terms of deconstructing the question, very much an iterative process. They've been a terrific client to work with. We also then did a series of rounds of user testing, so both with consumers and with dealers. We did moderated interviews as our deepest dive on the content and the content flow. And I can say we also use Maze. If anyone hasn't used Maze, you should really take a look. It's I'll say it for you, ZE.co. So Maze.co, they're free. We pay for the professional service, but their free program allows you to have a series of tests that you can, in essence, have 10 questions. We use XD for our design software. And so you put your prototype in there, you ask your 10 questions, and the free package lets you ask up to 30 people. But for instance, if you only need, say, 30, you can do that 10 different times, and it's a free service in that regard. And the results come back most often in a day or 2. And if anyone's looking for a side hustle and you're a user testing geek, you too can be paid to do research. So that's my plug for Maze, but I'm not attached to them at all. Alas, we did, again, the testing was both on mobile and the desktop versions, again, with consumers and with dealers. And it really did span all aspects of the website. So it's about the design, the information architecture, the content flow, the content itself, the endpoints in terms of the guidance given. And it really has been really insightful in terms of that research that we did. This is what it looks like. This is my self-help, the landing page. There's some information that provides an overview, and I'll just quickly show you the video. Maybe I'll let you navigate to that. Sorry, Jay. Fair enough. Just a quick, snappy introduction. The client was really concerned that what they really want to do is lower the volume of phone-based inquiries that they're receiving. On their website now, they had feedback. They'd done their own user testing that basically said the public is having a hard time finding the information they need. So they get on the phone, they make an inquiry, the service person says, go to our website, here's a link. And so there's got to be a better way. And so ultimately, as the video describes, we created this series of package of distinct issues, these pathways for those issues. And as you move forward and answer yes or no, questions like, did the dealer inform you of this particular issue related to the vehicle, make a big difference in terms of where does that pathway go and what information is provided. And so the video provides a snappy little engaging way to get them to do these interactive pathways as opposed to clicking through the content, because that's always available to them as well. Oh, and here we go. Thank you. Gotta find the mouse.
There we go.
No, oh, there it is. Sorry. All right, and so yeah, just a quick introduction here. Again, this is just from the home page. So answer some questions, review the information, and then take action based on the input that you've provided. And I'll just go through quickly here. These are some screenshots from the website. So you'll notice here, this is your deeper down into the pathway now. So you see in the left-hand column, we'll provide some information. The right-hand side is the bulk of the content in terms of questions and ultimately answers. These are some of the 9 issues that can be addressed. And just as a little more detail in terms of some of the content and functionality, you can see we've gamified this. We provide that progress indicator. You're 40% through, keep going. We have the ability to email yourself. So you want to stop the quiz, you want to stop the interactive guide, you can email your progress and then come back. We give you a link. You can come back exactly to where you last left off. You also get a summary of everything you've done so far. So the left-hand column also, it says information you've provided. These are the answers you said. It's a little cut off on my screen capture, but then there's supporting information that the VSA then has provided. And it really does move back and forth in terms of a question. Here's some information, another question, here's some other information. So it moves through in that pathway kind of way. Here's just a sample of some information as an example of one of those content elements. So I just redlined some of that content. The VSA may be able to help you in this particular instance. BC law says X, and that ultimately in this particular context, the dealer must tell you certain things about the condition of the vehicle. So again, it's all legally based, it's all plain language and accessible to users. As they move deeper here, we're getting closer to the end, 82%. And here then is the beginning of the presentation of, given the information you've provided, here are some of the options for you. So number 1, you can go directly to the dealer. Number 2, you can use our online dispute resolution platform, Connector. I'll talk more about that shortly. You can file a formal complaint. You see here on the left-hand side, this is a little bit deeper dive. If you say, I want to contact the dealer directly, VSA wants that consumer to be prepared and have a good conversation. So a few tips and some guidance about preparing for that call or the meeting in person. And then if they choose to number 3 option to file a formal complaint, the links take you to that formal complaint and there's some further information on that. This is the email summary page. So if you hadn't done it already at the end of the journey here, absolutely email yourself and then you'll get the full summary of your options. Included in that are other options. So suppose in this case, I've chosen option number 1. We want to make sure that the consumers are aware. You also have the option to choose number 2, 3, 4, and 5 in this particular scenario. And again, the number 2 option there is Connector, the online dispute resolution platform. And so we'll move quickly into that. So Connector enables consumers and dealers to communicate directly. So you remember I said they have the ability to investigate disputes, and that ultimately through resolution, sooner or later, it's about the consumer talking to the dealer once again. That's the idea of the online dispute resolution platform. They wanted a solution that allows consumers, through a convenient mechanism, allows consumers and dealers to negotiate and hopefully reach a settlement without making the call, without filing a formal complaint. Let the consumer and the dealer work it through on their own. Some of the benefits of ODR, of course, it's accessible 24/7. It provides a record of the communication, so that's a positive thing from a legal perspective, of course. It provides a record of that communication between the dealer and the consumer. And it also has the ability to provide a formal agreement, and I'll show you a sample of that a little bit later. In terms of creating Connector, Jess already has an online dispute resolution platform. So we use that with our small claims court. We built it initially for small claims court in BC. It was a platform, if anyone's heard of the BC Civil Resolution Tribunal, it was a platform that actually informed the development of that. Civil Resolution Tribunal now does small claims in BC up to $5,000, and our court does $5,000 to $35,000. And so Jess had an ODR platform, so that was an excellent starting point just in terms of the build. It enables both two-party communication as well as two-party with a neutral third. And we have different approaches to the intake. You can have an intake that is generated from a form fill, basically. So it's an API and automatically uploaded and part of ODR. Or in this case, VSA wanted it to be a consumer-initiated intake. And so the consumer goes through, they identify themselves, they identify the dealer. I bought this car, this model, this date, and here's my issue. That then generates an automated email message to the dealer to say, Bob has an issue with the vehicle, jump in on the platform and negotiate. And so from VSA, they don't provide a neutral third. There's no mediator involved. It's just the two parties communicating directly. And ultimately through the platform, there is the option to select formal agreement once again. In terms of our build and the customization, again, we already had this, and this is familiar. We've built ODR for several clients now. It's often the case that the client has a particular intake stream. There's certain information they want to know. We've never used ODR for vehicles, so it's new for us. Create the fields to capture vehicle identification number, dealer information, etc. So custom intake, an easy part of the build. Custom notifications and triggers, that always comes with the territory. When do you want to inform both parties about what and how much and what do you say in that messaging? And then ultimately custom reporting. What do they want to know? They want to, especially for instance, VSA as a regulator of the sector, they want to ensure that dealers are responsive to consumers. So that was some distinct reporting that we built out for them. In terms of the development inputs, it was really much like my self-help. The client is the expert in terms of the content and the functionality that they wish to have. We then went through extensive user testing once again. So just through Zoom calls, moderated interviews with consumers, with dealers, desktop and mobile. And we also used Maze for the design interface and some of that content flow. And this is what it looks like. And I'll play another short video. Thank you, Jay. And so I'll just show you a couple more screenshots from the site. Thank you again for driving that bus, Jay. That's terrific. And so that's our landing page. So we provide some guidance in terms of the video, why use Connector. And again, they've already gone through my self-help and selected this as that option they wish to proceed with. So we have some buy-in in that regard. We've played through the video. We explained to them briefly how it works, again, just in an illustrative way. And this is the landing page. And I do want to say this is the top half. The next slide, I'll show you the bottom half. But in essence, ODR is all about asynchronous communication. It's about sending messages back and forth, getting email notifications that, hey, the other party has sent you a new message related to the issue. They can upload documents, so receipt, damage of the vehicle, pictures, etc., contracts. And so on the right-hand column, you see the beginnings of what is the dispute details. I'll just click through to the next slide, where you see the inbox. So messages are collected in the inbox between the two parties. All of those, you click the plus and they expand out, but you see who is sending the message to whom. And ultimately the green ones are the agreement. And so it started with, in this particular instance, where I was the test consumer and my pretend Kingsway Honda dealer. I did ultimately buy a car from them once upon a time, but alas, that pretend dealer created a draft agreement. It went back and forth a little bit that then arrived in a final agreement. And so that final agreement is in fact a contract. And it's just the terms of the contract is what the two parties are negotiating back and forth. You said X, and so I want Y in essence, in terms of the content of that. The dealer agrees to A or B or C, whatever that might be. And it's the terms that become part of that otherwise template contract. So also in the right-hand column, you see we have dispute details to start, but you also see all the uploaded documents. All the uploaded documents, and then some guidance as well. So negotiation tips. One thing we're still authoring is in essence a how-to guide, the manual for the site, and so that'll go there as well. And then abusive contact, things not to say, abusive conduct, and then a sample agreement. So again, sample terms that they can use. So I'm going to go through this one really quickly because in fact we're just about out of time. So Pacific Legal Education and Outreach is a nonprofit organization in British Columbia. They provide legal help for nonprofit organizations. So yes, a nonprofit that helps nonprofits. And so in that context, here in the room, we all have a lot of legal strengths because we worked in this sector for a while. But think of other nonprofits that are community oriented for youth, for the arts, for sports, and a range of others. It's often the case that staff at nonprofit organizations don't have a lot of legal expertise. And yet in BC, and in every jurisdiction in BC, it's called the Societies Act, but there's a range of legislation about compliance in essence. What records do you need to keep in terms of members or board of directors? What are certain procedures that you need to have? Pacific Legal Education is the organization that helps British Columbia nonprofit organizations. I'm going to skip through this and just go quickly to show you. But I'll say it's much the same in terms of what I was showing for my self-help. It's a very similar build in terms of this is all a Drupal 9 build. It's a set of interactive questions to help the users get the specific information they need based on the answers that they've provided. So there's no secret sauce in terms of the video. That's in production now. The site doesn't launch until April, but it's coming soon. And ultimately, this is a sample of some specific issues, for example, under privacy. And they have individual guides in this context, say quizzes or assessments, and it shows the amount of time that it would take. And so you can go through, learn a little bit more about having a privacy policy, or learn a little bit more about record keeping and how long you need to keep records, learn a little bit more about employment and hiring and ... across a range of topics. This is the look and feel of the site. They wanted a chat-like interface. Most of their users are accessing on mobile. And so while I'm showing the desktop view, this really looks like a chat-like interface. And so this expert robot type individual is communicating in a back and forth way, again, with non-legally inclined individuals to help provide information. So the sample question here is about, do you keep paper records? You can see we have some contextual help information. If they don't understand certain terminology, depending on their answers, we start to generate a to-do list. And so you get to the end of the pathway. Here's a sample to-do list. So there's a range of actions for that staff member to do in order to comply in the specific area, in this case, privacy and retention of records related to this issue. And so that's, again, in this context, what we built for Pleo in terms of my self-help. And previously it was my self-help was for VSA and Connector was for VSA. And for this side, they call them legal help guides. That's it.
So any
Questions?
questions? Yeah.
Also, if you want to know more about Jess, I'm just going to give a shout out. Sonia Poulin, our CEO, is in the front row here, and we're both glad to take questions. Yep. So it's kind of a yes or no. So they can skip starting. Once they start, they're into the pathways, but they don't need to go through the pathways. They can still navigate in a traditional way to content that's available on the website. And they can always go back, right? If you're into a pathway, you can click home and start again and navigate again.
Third question, what technology do you use to program the pathways?
So it's all Drupal based. And so in that regard, it's really simplified logic, John, in terms of the build. It's this URL is going to this URL if it's A, and if it's B, it's going to this other one. So it's really not a complex build in terms of Drupal. It's all URL based pointing.
Use the workflow or the flow good Drupal?
I don't know. I can get back to you. We'll ask our developer that, John, but I don't know.
All right.
I saw a question here and then a couple more, but yes, go ahead. Yeah.
So about the videos, something that I spent a lot of time thinking about and working on too. What was the average length of the videos?
They were.
Is that for Minnesota?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. So question was about average length of the videos.
We said that we didn't want them to be any longer than.
I think we shot for like a minute 30 to 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And most of them are within that or under it. I know we have like one or two that are slightly over, but pretty short.
And these ones were both a minute, Jack, just quick ones. Yep.
Yeah, I have another question about the videos. You said that you didn't think they performed so well from your website itself.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning people coming to your website weren't necessarily looking at videos. Have you looked at all to see how they would perform, maybe like someone just going to YouTube or searching, like being in a video world first rather than
Yeah, so we actually have them in our YouTube channel. That's where they're just pulled into our website from there. And that's where we pulled the analytics from. So we could see that from there, they weren't getting a lot of use.
Oh, sorry.
and the use that they were getting was
I just
from the
wanted to get
website?
the screenshot.
It
Can you track how people find a YouTube video?
I think we can see like people who are like searching.
Yeah,
It's been a bit since I looked at those analytics.
right.
Yeah. We just have used like the standard YouTube analytics that are available. We haven't gone beyond that. But we can see like the source. So if they were looking at it through Law Help versus through YouTube.
So how many hours did you put behind the scenes being like all these quizzes and everything set up, right? Because I know you get that thing next. And you have to get a lot of people involved, so just like in general, like how long did it take?
The initial build obviously took some time, but now kind of in the maintenance end of it, when we're adding additional quizzes, things like that, it's actually quite quick. Like I said, we meet each month, we spend a few minutes talking about, I pull together the information on analytics ahead of time. And so we take a look at that. We kind of use our criteria. We decide which fact sheet we want to do next. And then we just quickly kind of knock out our questions and our explanation. And then going into our quiz manager in the back end and adding it is super quick. It's anybody who's on a Drupal site, it's like adding, any content in Drupal. It's you put your question in, you put your explanation, select which one's your correct answer, add your threshold, and then just linking out to our live chat and to the guide for folks who meet that threshold and want to move on to additional help.
And I'll say for the videos, we had an A to J tech fellow working with us for the summer, and she got it down to like a video a week. So it was an intensive process, I would say. Yeah. And now she built up some expertise in the system we were using. And now I would say we don't have that as much.
You said at the beginning that one of the goals of having the quizzes was to increase confidence in people, and I'm wondering if you measured that once you created the quizzes. How you measured that?
So I would say that we can't specifically measure that, but I think what we can gauge is from the overall accuracy, the repetitiveness of folks who are retaking these quizzes, looking at it in the context of other overall traffic on our website. I think we can, kind of assume that that's what it's doing, or hoping that's what it's doing. But it seems that it's at least meeting the mark of improving people's understanding of the content because we're seeing really high accuracy rates on it.
So you said that quizzes were popular. So, how many people are going on your site? How often are people taking, or like what percentage of those people are taking quizzes?
Ooh, that's a good question. I didn't pull the percentage of overall traffic, so I would have to look back at that one. That's a great question. But yeah, as we saw, we had 32,600 responses in the last year, which is huge, much larger than it was the year before.
But yeah, it's a little bit difficult since the reporting on the quizzes is within Drupal. So we can't tell like by user, like it might be the same user taking like 4 quizzes. So we can't really like correlate that. We could look at like page views, I suppose. And we can look at like quiz responses on a fact sheet versus views of that fact sheet. But I don't have those numbers, unfortunately.
Sorry, I have another question. For the legal services search, when you have it filtering by lawyers, like a lawyer referral that you paid lawyer essentially.
Yeah.
Is that linking out to something, or is that something where it pulls a specific existing database, or how does that connect?
Yeah, for the most part, we're linking out to like a bar association referral service or like information. We have a couple of services where you can call and get a referral. We do have an integration with our State Bar Association's limited scope roster, where we can also through an API send to their case management system a request for a consultation. And then that gets sucked into their system, and the lawyer can call that person back.
It can all, it's, yes, indeed. I mean, we are a Drupal house in that regard. And so we use Drupal across a range of our builds, but this could have been a WordPress site or a range of other different sites. Sure. It's the content part that's almost always the heavy lifting, frankly. It's really not the site build. And so it's kind of technology neutral. And you really do spend most of your time working through what are the issues, what questions we have to ask, what information can we provide, and then at the end, how do we guide them to some good next steps? And so it's most often about the content. Just 1 or 2 more minutes. Any other questions? Second to last session of the day. It's that time.